Okay, it is 4:30. We do have folks that are joining us. They're continuing to join us. This session is being recorded. My name is Richard Orduno with CAMS. I'm the Regional Vice President on the North Carolina Coastal Region. Very happy to have you all joining us today. It's my pleasure to introduce Rob Taliercio with Law Firm Carolinas. Rob, did I get that right?
Michael Taliercio.
Michael Taliercio. Too many Robs in the title.
So close, Rich. So close. You got the last name.
So close. But this is an interesting session. Robert's Rules versus Bob Rules. How formal you really need to be. So for the board members that are joining us today, thank you for joining. I commend you for taking the time to learn more about your role as board members. Rob's got a lot of great information, and I'll be turning it over to him in just a moment. We will be taking questions through the Q&A portion. I'll be watching that, and I will pop in and let Rob know that they're there as soon as we see them. So thank you all. Rob, are you ready to get started? I'm doing it again, Michael.
Rich, yes,
too many Robs, man.
I am ready, Rob.
So Rob is not ready, but
Rob
Michael
is not ready,
is ready.
But I, Michael, am ready.
All right, floor is yours, sir. Thank you.
All right. Everybody, let me just share my screen and then we will start. So, again, my name is Michael Taliercio. I am a partner at Law Firm Carolinas. I'm also a professional registered parliamentarian. That is the highest designation from the National Association of Parliamentarians. Today, I'm going to be talking about Robert's Rules of Order versus Bob's Rules of Order. Just, how formal do you need to be with your procedural rules at meetings? And we're going to cover we've already covered the introduction on who I am. You had my email there on that prior slide. If you want to take a screenshot, that's the email. If you want to email me questions later, feel free to, or just put your questions in the Q&A and I'll try to answer them as they come up. We're going to talk first about parliamentary procedure generally, then agendas, then minutes, then virtual meetings. When we talk about virtual meetings, I'm going to tell you kind of some best practices and tips. This isn't going to be, this is going to be a more practical presentation on how to have successful virtual meetings than it is going to be like a statutory focused, here's how you can have virtual meetings under North Carolina or South Carolina law. So let's dive into it. First of all, what is parliamentary procedure? If you're on this webinar, you want to know. So what is it? Parliamentary procedure are rules for meetings. The rules that determine how you decide disputes as meetings, the rules that determine the officer's duties at meetings, and there's numerous sets of parliamentary procedure rules. What we're going to be talking about is Robert's Rules of Order. That is General Robert. He was an engineering officer in the 19th century in the U.S. Army. He originally wrote Robert's Rules of Order in 1876. We're now on the 12th edition. The original edition was a mere 176 pages long. The current book is over 700 pages long with all the charts and everything. You can see me, it looks like this. It's enormous. So we're not going to obviously be able to cover everything in an hour, but the reason why we're talking about Robert's Rules of Order is first, it's the most commonly used set of parliamentary rules in the country. Second, if you're a North Carolina homeowners association or condo association, North Carolina law requires that you use Robert's Rules of Order unless your bylaws say otherwise, to conduct both your board meetings and your membership meetings. So if you don't know anything about Robert's Rules of Order, this is going to be a very fast intro. Now, in South Carolina, you should just go with whatever your bylaws or other governing documents say in terms of procedural rules. Likely, though, you're probably also using Robert's Rules of Order if you're a South Carolina association. Let's talk about where are Robert's Rules of Order in the hierarchy of rules. They're at the bottom. You can see the top, you've got federal law. Under that, you've got state law. in North Carolina, that's going to be your Condo Act, your Planned Community Act. Below that, you've got your governing documents, the Articles of Incorporation, your bylaws, your covenants. Beneath that, you've got your special rules of order, which are rules that your association has adopted for this particular meeting, or just as kind of standing rules for the association. Commonly adopted rules are things like time limits for speeches, a requirement that everybody be polite, a requirement that everybody gives their name and their address before they speak. It's not uncommon for an association or a club to have a set of rules that govern meetings. That's what special rules of order are. Then at the very bottom is your parliamentary authority, which kind of fills in the cracks where any of these other rules don't apply. So if you have a state law that applies, go with the state law. If your bylaws talk to something, go with your bylaws. But if you don't have any of that, you go with the default, which is what's in Robert's Rules of Order. So the most important person in terms of running a meeting is the chair. Let's talk about what the chair's duties are at a meeting. First, your duties to open and close the meeting, your duties to enact the business, your duties to recognize members, process motions, enforce rules to be impartial, not to engage in debate while presiding, and to expedite business if possible. Which, if you're a president, you might be thinking, oh, I'm not doing that. And you might be kind of getting worried already. Well, so first, rules are different between membership meetings and board meetings. All right, these very formal duties of the president as the chair of the meeting are going to apply most in a large membership meeting. So if you've got a 50-person membership meeting or a 100-person membership meeting and you're chairing that meeting, you do need to follow all these things. And I would say the thing you need to follow the most is be impartial and don't debate with members while you're presiding. You're supposed to be the referee and the master of ceremonies for the meeting. That's your job as the chair, is to run an orderly meeting. Obviously, you're not running an orderly meeting if you're arguing with members about things during the meeting. That's, I think, the number one thing I see inexperienced chairs doing that's not right under the rules. So, however, in a board meeting, the rules are different. So let's talk about small boards. These are my pets. That's my dog, Toby, my cat, Lucy, and my other dog, Patrick. Toby's a poodle. Patrick's a Jack Russell. So say you've got a board of 3, like my 3 pets. Under Roberts, a lot of the formalities of these rules that I'm going to go through don't apply. The rules are relaxed. You don't have to formally recognize the other board members. We're going to talk about motions and seconds here soon. You don't have to second motions in a board meeting. We're going to talk about limits on debate. If you're in a small board, which a small board is 12 or less, if you have a 12 or less person board, there's unlimited debate. If you're the chair, you're allowed to vote and debate. You're allowed to engage in formal discussion. You don't need motions on everything. In a small board setting, if everybody knows what you're talking about, you can take a vote without even having made a motion. So probably your board meetings are going fine. You're probably largely following the rules in this book in a board meeting, not knowing it, because the rules are much relaxed in a small board setting. So here's again the duties of the chair. You can see that a lot of these duties, you don't need to formally recognize everybody to talk. You don't necessarily need motions if everybody understands what's going on. You can debate while presiding. All of those things are relaxed in sort of a small meeting. However, if we're talking about a membership meeting and you have a lot of people then it's important for you as the chair to follow the formality required by the rules, because that's going to keep the meeting orderly and that's going to expedite business. So let's talk about just motions, which motions are how you do anything in a meeting. The basic process of a motion is a member makes a motion, another member seconds the motion, you, the chair, would state the motion, you debate the motion, and then you'd vote on it. So, for example, say at the annual meeting, somebody wants to form a social committee to have, little informal get-togethers in the neighborhood. Hold on, Rich, do I have a question?
Yeah, we had a couple of questions, a long one and a short one. I'll do the short one first. What is the max size of a board to use small meeting rules?
12. The book says about 12, but I would say 12. Don't go higher than 12.
Thank you. And this one's long, so bear with me just a moment. As a board member of our HOA, I was required to sign a code of conduct document that states I will support all board decisions. So does this mean I give up my rights as a property owner? For instances, if the board is requesting rezoning of a property, can I not speak to the County Planning Commission to bring to their attention my concerns as a POA owner, not as a member of the board? I always wonder when I'm a board member, when at a board meeting or workshop, or all the time.
So, Rich, can you read that question? I think maybe I missed part of it.
Sure. As a board member of our HOA, I was required to sign a code of conduct document that states I will support all board decisions. Does this mean I give up my rights as a property owner? So the gist is, when am I a property owner? When am I a board member?
Well, so, okay,
what
so
is
I would
my authority?
say, so this is, so I'm going to give the lawyer answer, which is, it depends. I need to see the full code of conduct document, need to know the exact scenario. However, usually when you're saying you're supposed to support the board decision, it would mean that if the board decides to hire this landscaper, and you're debating that decision at the board meeting, once the board makes the decision, for the purposes of your official role with the association as a board member, you can't go around and try to sabotage the board's, decision inside the association. That's typically what they mean with that. What they don't mean is, and I don't know that, is that, outside of that, if something outside the scope of the homeowners association, I don't think they're really trying to change your rights outside the homeowners association. It's just within the context of homeowners association meetings and board meetings, that once the boards make a decision, if you're a member of the board, you're expected to not kind of try to sabotage the board decision at a subsequent membership meeting. That would be my guess, but I haven't seen the code of conduct specifically, obviously. Rich, another question.
You indicate unlimited debate is allowed at small board meetings. Is the chair allowed to cut off excessive debate in small meeting settings?
Yes. Yes. And when we talk about motions, I'm going to talk about the motion specifically to end debate. What should happen if it's in a small meeting setting and there's unlimited debate? And kind of when I say unlimited debate is normally, when we get to my debate slide, in a large membership meeting, you're allowed to debate twice per item of business, every person is. And once you give your first thing in debate, you don't get recognized again until everybody else who's wanted to speak has been recognized. In a board setting, you can speak more than twice, and everybody has the right to speak more than twice, but there's a motion to end debate. So if the debate's been going on a long time and the chair thinks that much of the board is tired of it, what the chair can do is they can just say, okay, we've been at this for an hour. We've had a substantial amount of debate. Everybody's spoken multiple times. I know more people want to speak, but we need to move on. So do we want to end debate now, or do we want to continue debate? and then you take a vote on ending debate. It requires a 2/3. If you get that 2/3, debate's over. If you don't get the 2/3, that means people want to keep talking and the debate would continue on. So back to the slides, this is the basic motion process. A member would make the motion, the chair restates, you get a second on the motion, the chair restates the motion. The reason why the chair is restating the motion is so everybody knows what you're talking about. In a large membership meeting, that can actually be an issue. Somebody in the back might not have heard what somebody said in the front when they made the motion. So it's important for the chair to restate the motion. Then you go on to debate, and then you go on to vote. Let's talk about seconds specifically, because there's a lot of misconceptions about what seconds are. Seconds just mean that another person wants to talk about this in the room. You can second something even if you want to vote against it, or if you think it's a terrible idea. You don't need to be recognized to make a second. You just say second. And if a committee or something is making a motion, a second isn't required because obviously the committee there's more than one person on the committee. So if a motion is coming from a committee, that already means that more than one person in the room wants to talk about it. The seconds aren't necessary in board meetings because it's not a big giant group of people. The whole idea behind seconds is not to waste everybody's time if only one person of a big group wants to talk about something. If the other thing is that seconds aren't like some piece of parliamentary magic, okay? If the debate, if say the treasurer says, okay, I've got a motion to adopt the budget, and then people start debating whether or not this is a good budget immediately. And then after 6 people speak in debate, somebody says, whoa, point of order. Was there a second? I never heard a second on the motion to adopt the budget. You don't need a second. You've already had 6 people in debate. Because debate is started and everybody wants to talk about it, it's fine. The second is assumed because people started debating immediately. However, if somebody makes a motion, I move the association by a cat, and then nobody speaks and everybody just looks around awkwardly and it's crickets in the room, and you, the chair, kind of look around and say, okay, do we have a second on the cat motion? Does anybody want to buy a cat? Should we get an association cat? And nobody says anything. Everybody just kind of looks at their hands. Then the chair would say, okay, well, I don't see a second on the motion. The motion's going to die for lack of a second. Because everybody thought it was a bad idea and nobody wanted to discuss it at all, means the motion just fails. So that's the only instance where a motion will fail for the lack of a second. If literally nobody else wants to talk about it, the chair asks for a second and nobody's willing to second the motion. In every other instance, if there's a second or if debate just starts and people start arguing about it, you don't need a second, you're fine. And in a small board setting, you don't need a second because there's so few people in the room, right? If there's only 5 people on the board, requiring the person to make the motion and a second is already 40% of the board. You only need, if you need a majority of the board, you only need 3 people. You shouldn't require 2 people to have a motion just to have it happen. So after you get a second on a motion, then you go into debate. Again, this is for a formal membership meeting. The person who made the motion is entitled to speak first. If you're the chair, you should try to alternate between supporters and opponents of the motion if possible. You should recognize people who haven't spoken before you recognize people to speak a second time. And debate needs to be relevant to whatever the motion is. So if we're on that silly motion for the association to buy a cat, somebody can't be talking about the pool rules. They need to talk about whether or not we're buying a cat while we're debating the cat motion. And then finally, even though you might have seen this on C-SPAN or television, where somebody talks about, I'm going to yield my time to somebody else, right? You hear this in the Senate all the time. Oh, I yield the remainder of my time to the right honorable senator from Wyoming. Thank you, sir. I will. That's not in Robert's rules. There's no yielding of time. If somebody else wants to speak, they just need to be recognized. That's not, there are special rules for the Senate and the House of Representatives and for North Carolina House and Senate, as well as South Carolina. Those rules might allow yielding of time. Robert's Rules of Order do not. These formal debate rules, though, don't apply in a small board meeting. If you have 6 people in your board meeting, and what you're doing is just go around the room and hear from everybody until nobody else wants to speak, that's okay, that's fine. That's in accordance with the rules. These more formal debate rules apply in a membership meeting setting where you have a lot more than 12 people. So let's talk about voting, kind of the 4th step on a motion. You're the presiding officer, you restate the motion being voted on again. Yes for the yes votes, yes for the no votes, you announce the prevailing side, and then you announce what's happened. So all those, again, we're going to vote on the motion to adopt the budget. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The budget is adopted. And now we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda. That's what you would do as the presiding officer. The reason why you have to sort of formally do that is, first, you restate the motion that's being voted on. So again, everybody knows what's happening. The key thing for the presiding officer is that everybody understands what we're doing. Then you ask for yes votes first and no votes, and kind of clearly say what you want people to say. You know, all those in favor say yes, all those in favor say aye, those are the normal things. All those opposed say no, that's the typical thing. Make it clear what people need to say so they don't get confused. And then even if it's obvious to you at the front of the room that the motion passed, still announce that it passed, because it might not be obvious to the people in the back of the room. In the back of the room, the no votes might have been really loud and they might have thought it failed. Or somebody in the back of the room may not have been paying close attention. They might have been on their phone the whole time and not really, and you know, they voted and then they kind of zoned out, but they probably want to know what happened. So that's why you should clearly announce what happened. As your job, if you're the chair of the meeting, a lot of it is doing things to make sure everybody understands, even though they're repetitious. Like announcing what we're doing, even though probably everybody's paying attention, should already know what we're doing. Well, guess what? Everybody's probably not paying attention, unfortunately. So you have to keep doing these sort of repetitive things. That's what the rule calls for. The rules call for it. So then finally, here is a chart of common motions in Roberts. You know, the main motion, that's the motion to adopt business, the motion to amend, if you want to make changes, the motion to refer something to a committee, motion to postpone, to basically push it off to a later time, motion to limit or extend debate, motion to close debate, probably the most valuable motion, it'll just end debate. I'm not going to go through all of these in a lot of detail because one, I mean, this is only a small subset of, there's dozens and dozens more of these in this book, and I only have an hour, but also a lot of these motions aren't super relevant in your board or membership meetings. I mean, the one that I want to highlight, you know, I mean, motion to recess, motion to take a break, motion to adjourn, motion to end the meeting. You can see from the chart whether or not the motions are debatable and what's required to adopt those motions. The key motion that you're going to want to, if you take away anything from this entire presentation, is the existence of the motion to close debate. Requires a second, it's not debatable, requires a 2/3 to be adopted, but immediately closes debate on pending question, requires a vote on the question. The reason why this is such a valuable motion is we all attend meetings with people who like to talk too much and who want to talk on everything. And we all have other things to do with our lives. So if there's not a motion, if you're talking about something, there's not really significant opposition, but that one person that likes to hear themselves talk is talking at length, this is how you stop those few people, is make a motion to close debate. So you can just end debate, take a vote, move on. Rich, what do we got question-wise?
If a member of the board recuses themselves from voting, which leaves an even number of votes, and the vote turns out to be tied, what happens?
So the motion fails. Well, assuming, yeah, the motion is going to fail. So a majority is more than half. So if you had a 5-person board, one person recused himself, and you got a 2-2 split, you don't have more than half. You need 3 for that motion to be adopted. That answer question?
I think so. The motion dies is this, I think
Motion
the answer.
fails. Motion fails. It didn't get majority.
Good. One more. I assume that in a board meeting, for example, only board members can debate. It's not open to debate by the residents who are attending.
Yes, so exactly right. In a board, when I talk about members in these meetings, in a board, the only members of the board are the elected directors. The members of the neighborhood, they're owners in the neighborhood, you know, they're guests in the meeting. They don't have any debate or voting rights as members of the board. If your agenda or whatever has some sort of time where they're allowed to speak, then they can speak and give those comments at the beginning or end of the meeting or whenever it is, but they don't have any other rights. You have to be a member of the particular group who's having a meeting. So you have to be a member of the board of directors to debate and vote on the board, or you have to be a member of the neighborhood to debate and vote in the neighborhood. Same reason why in a neighborhood meeting, you know, a renter who's living in a property isn't going to have the rights to debate and vote because they don't own property in the neighborhood unless they've got a proxy or something from somebody, even though they might, because they don't own the property in the neighborhood. Now, let me talk about membership meetings specifically. So, especially in North Carolina, there are a lot of limits on what motions can be made by the members at membership meetings. First, a lot of motions that the members have the right to make require prior notice. You know, if you want to remove a board member, if you want to amend the documents, those by statute and probably by our governing documents usually require a certain notice to be given in advance. It has to be included in the agenda or in the meeting notice that goes out to everybody. So you can't just get up and ask to make a motion to remove the board because it hasn't been given that prior notice. But then also, the big limitation of motions at a membership meeting is that for homeowners and condo associations, most of the power is given to the executive board. Typically, your articles of incorporation, bylaws, covenants give most of the day-to-day power to the executive board, the power to hire the vendors, hire the property manager, power to conduct the audit, the power to do all those day-to-day things is given to the executive board. Typically, the members at a membership meeting don't have the power under the documents to hire or fire a particular vendor. That power is given to the executive board. What the members have the right to do is elect the executive board. So, at a membership meeting, what that means is that a lot of these potential motions, you know, if a lot of people don't like the landscaper, they think the landscaper is doing a bad job and they want to fire the landscaper, it's not going to be in order for the members to make a motion to fire the landscaper at the membership meeting because they don't have that power. The members don't have the power to hire or fire the landscaper. That's the executive board's power. What the members have the power to do is elect people to the executive board that then can fire the landscaper. So at a membership meeting, typically, there's not a lot of motions that are even going to be in order coming from the members. Now, let's go into the next thing procedure-wise, which is agendas. Agendas are really important to having efficient meetings. There's kind of 3 basic types of agendas. An informal agenda that's not voted on, that's a guideline, especially in a board meeting, this is helpful. You know, this is basically just a list of things that we're going to talk about. You know, you'd have them, if you don't use I would think that most of your board meetings use at least an informal agenda, right? Somebody sends around an email, hey, here's what we're going to talk about at the board meeting. It's good for keeping that on track, just so everybody can remember what the plan is to talk about. Then kind of the next level of formality is an adopted agenda, which is at the beginning of your board meeting, you vote on to adopt the agenda. And it's usually after you approve the minutes, or maybe even before approving the minutes, one of the first things you do. You say, okay, everybody's received a copy of the agenda. I'll hear a motion to adopt the agenda. Okay, I move to adopt the agenda. Second, take a vote on adopting the agenda. It requires 2/3. Once it's adopted, it'll require 2/3 to change later. The reason why it's useful to have an adopted agenda is if, one, it's a membership meeting and you think the members might try to do things that are going to set the meeting off in the wrong direction, having an agenda that you adopt at the beginning of the meeting can kind of reduce that problem. But secondly, it's also useful if it's a difficult situation, like say you have multiple factions on your board. If you adopt an agenda where you lay out, here's the 4 things we're talking about, then you won't get infighting about when are we going to get to the budget. Well, we adopted the agenda, the budget's the 4th thing. So just hold off. Let's talk about these other things first. Let's talk about the landscaper. Let's talk about the social club report first, and then we'll get to the budget. That's the use for an adopted agenda. Now, the final type of agenda is a timed agenda. Timed agenda, basically what you do is you decide how long you want your meeting to take. Say you want your meeting to take an hour, right? And then you figure out what you want to do during the meeting and you give everything a specific amount of time. So, call to business might be 6 p.m., adopt reading and approval of the minutes might be 6:02 p.m. The president's report might be 6:05 p.m. Vice president's report might be 6:10 p.m., et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Usually, you actually have to do this by starting in reverse, right? You start with, you create a list of everything you want to do, when you want to finish, and then you kind of plug things in time-wise, and you have to be realistic about how long things are going to take. The reason why you would spend all the time to do this, though, is if you vote on a timed agenda, so you get an adopted timed agenda, then what happens is when you get to the end of those times, right? If you're supposed to consider the budget at 6:30 and it rolls around to 6:30, if you're the chair, you say, okay, well, the time for discussion on the landscaping report's over. It's now 6:30. We need to move on to the budget. And I'm going to have to stop this debate. We move on to the budget. It's a great way to expedite meetings where they're very divisive and where they might run long. If you're having problems with long meetings, I'd strongly suggest adopting a timed agenda at the beginning of the meeting because it'll expedite your meetings rather than having to move to close debate a whole bunch during the meeting. Rich, what do we got?
Just quickly, everyone, we will get to as many of these questions as we can, but we've had a few come through that I'm going to hit Michael with. So one question is, what if there is a motion in a second, but the president refuses to acknowledge that motion?
So it depends. So if the president gives a reason for refusing to acknowledge the motion, like they say, look, that motion's not in order now, which might be the reason why they would acknowledge the motion, then you can either appeal their decision that it's not in order, or probably you might just have to make the motion at a different time. For example, if the time to discuss the budget is later on in the meeting and you make a motion about the budget at the beginning of the meeting, the motion says, the president says, look, I hear your motion about the budget, but we can't do the budget motion now. We have to wait till we get to the budget. Then really your remedy is to wait. But if the president just doesn't acknowledge it at all and just keeps going, I'd make the motion again or have somebody make the motion until you get a ruling on the president on the motion. Rich, what else?
Voting for board elections. What are the quorum requirements of using Zoom for participation of owners who are not on site? Do the changes allowed during COVID still apply?
Okay, so this is a big kind of topic. First, it depends on whether you're in North Carolina or South Carolina. North Carolina has a statute about this, and there's very specific requirements that kind of, I guess what I'd suggest you do if you're looking for the requirements on how to hold a virtual meeting and do it right is go to my law firm's blog, Law Firm Carolinas, and put in virtual meetings into the blog. My partner, Jim Slaughter, has a very long blog post explaining all the requirements of that statute to conduct a valid virtual meeting. And I have less than a half an hour left. It would take the whole, it would take much of the rest of my time to go through that statute. So if that's what you're looking for, look at the blog. If you've got more questions about it, send me an email and I'll try to help you through that. So then let's go on past types of agenda to just the standard order of business. All right. This is the order of business from Robert's Rules of Order. This is the usual order of business. Probably if your bylaws require an order of business, it's probably something like this. The call to order, reading approval of the minutes, reports of officers and standing committees, reports of your special committees, unfinished business, new business, and adjournment. Generally, a lot of when you send out the agenda of your membership meetings, what's kind of listed on the agenda is basically going to conform to this, right? Reading approval of the minutes first, officer reports, your property manager's reports, any other committee reports you might have, your pool committee, your landscaping committee reports. You're probably not going to have any unfinished business, almost certainly if it's a membership meeting. And then new business, which is largely going to be your elections. Maybe then after new business, you just have an open discussion. That's not really new business, but just a homeowner comment section, and then the meeting adjourns. So even though it doesn't use the exact titles, I'd imagine what you're doing for your membership meetings largely follows this anyway. Now, I wanted to bring this up. If you're a North Carolina association, either a condo or a homeowners association, there are some requirements for your agenda and your meeting notices, specifically that if there are amendments to the declaration of bylaws that are being considered, if there are budget changes, or if there are proposals to remove a director or an officer, those have to be in the circulated agenda that goes around before the meeting. Beside that, your agenda has to state the time and place and other items on the agenda. The reason why, so these items are probably going to be in new business, but also when I mentioned that certain things are going to require prior notice, and if they don't have prior notice, they're not in order. This is beyond what your documents say. In North Carolina, this is what the law says, is that if you want to amend the declaration of the bylaws, that has to go around to everybody in the meeting notice. Similarly, if there are budget changes or proposals to remove directors and officers, those all have to go around in the meeting notice. If they don't, then that motion is not going to be in order during the meeting. Now, let's just kind of go through in a more detailed fashion your basic parts of a meeting. First, you got your call to order. This is Patrick. He's just woken up. Your call to order, that's what it is. It's kind of the chair waking everybody up and declaring that the meeting's going to start. How does the chair do that? Well, the chair determines that there's a quorum. The chair doesn't have to say we have a quorum. The chair just determines you have a quorum and calls the meeting to order. Now, quorum is just a fancy word that means minimum number of people that have to be present for business to be validly transacted. Typically, your bylaws or articles of incorporation will have your quorum requirements. If you're a North Carolina homeowners or condo association that's subject to the Planned Community Act or the Condo Act, though by statute, they give minimum quorum numbers that will apply if you don't have something in your bylaws, 10% for HOAs, 20% for condos, but probably your bylaws will specify quorum numbers. Use the bylaws number because the bylaws number trumps whatever these minimums in the statute. The statute also, when we're talking about quorums in North Carolina, if the statute has these quorum reduction requirements where you can have your quorum from meeting by meeting, which, just as an example, say your original meeting had a quorum requirement of 50%, you adjourn the meeting once, it goes to 25%, then 12.5%, then 6.5%, if you had 3 meetings without quorum in a row. The question that I've seen about the quorum reduction provision of the Planned Community Act and the Condo Act is, oh, well, so can we adjourn the meeting for 20 minutes? And then, we were supposed to start at 6 o'clock. Can we adjourn till 6:20, hold a new meeting with half the quorum? No. All right, you can't do that. The way the statute works is you have to be adjourned to a later date by the affirmative vote of those present in person or by proxy to get the benefit of the statute. So you can't just adjourn the meeting 3 times in the same hour. So because obviously if you could do that, these quorum requirements would have no meaning, right? In a 100-person association where you required 50% for quorum, if you're allowed to just adjourn it 15 minutes to have the quorum, suddenly within an hour, you'd have quorum with 7 people instead of the 50 people that are required. And that's just not allowed by the statute. So if you're having problems with quorum and these statutes in North Carolina apply to your association, you have to adjourn the meeting till a later date. It can't be the same date the original meeting was set for. Now let's talk about meeting minutes, because this is kind of the second thing. Once the president's called the meeting to order, then there's reading and approval of the minutes. So, okay, first, reading the minutes. Don't do, this is Toby, he's asleep. That's what happens if you read the minutes. Everybody's going to go to sleep. Don't read the minutes. What you should do is distribute the minutes in advance. If there are corrections to the minute, you should do that by unanimous consent, which unanimous consent is just the president saying, okay, are there any corrections to the minutes? And then somebody might say, yeah, you misspelled my name. Taliercio is T-A-L, not T-O-L. Okay, duly noted, we'll make that correction. Are there any other corrections? Okay, hearing no corrections, is there any objection to approval of the minutes? Hearing none, minutes are approved. That's unanimous consent. Unanimous consent is asking if there are any objections. If you don't get an objection, then you've done it because everybody agrees. If you do get an objection when you ask for unanimous consent, you just take a vote. It's a majority vote to approve the minutes. You shouldn't. Now, the other problem, if reading and approving the minutes is taking a long time, which if you're not doing the reading part, right, you don't need to read the minutes. The rules say you don't need to read the minutes if they're distributed in advance. Distribute the minutes in advance, or in a membership meeting, make the minutes available to everybody as they walk in, or include them in the packet of things that goes out to everybody in advance, so they can just look those over and you don't read the minutes. It's a terribly boring thing to do. But sometimes I've been with groups that have trouble on the minutes because they aren't recording the minutes properly. The minutes are a record of what was done at the meeting. They're not a transcript of everything that was said at the meeting. Okay? What was done at the meeting is what motions were adopted. They're not what people said about the motions. So basically, include that third bullet point. This is White Lake Association membership meeting on February 16th. We adopted the budget. We received these reports. We conducted an election. Meeting was adjourned at 6:30 p.m. That would be the whole meeting. Even if there was an hour of debate about the budget and it was adopted, it's just the budget was moved by so-and-so, and then whether it was adopted or failed. What you shouldn't have in the meeting minutes, you don't include debate. If there's guest speakers, you don't include remarks from the guest speaker. If you're the secretary and you think motions are good or bad, you don't get to put your opinions in the minutes, all right? And if motions were withdrawn, if somebody makes a motion and then it's debated for a while and then they say, actually, I don't want to do this, I want to withdraw the motion. Everybody says, okay, we don't object to you withdrawing the motion gets withdrawn. Don't include anything about that in the minutes, because a motion that was made and then withdrawn, effectively nothing happened. So it's not, nothing was done, it doesn't come in the minutes. Here is an example of what meeting minutes should look like. Rich, you got a question?
Well, this ties into it. It's a good one. I get this a lot. How much of the debate do you include in the minutes?
None. You include no debate. In fact, if you look at the third paragraph of the sample minutes, that's what you should say. After debate or after discussion, the motion was adopted or failed. That's it. And here's the reason why you don't include debate. The minutes are a record of what the association did. Debate is just what members said. You don't, so it's not what the association did at all, but also, as a lawyer who represents plenty of associations, goes to a lot of meetings, people say stupid things at meetings all the time. Stupid things that are not the position of the association. And you don't want to record those stupid things in the minutes, because then later on they could cause legal problems for you, or they might just be embarrassing. You know, if somebody says something really horrible, you shouldn't have to put that in the minutes. And you don't, because it's not what was done. It's not an official action of your association. So all you should put in the minutes during debate is after debate or after discussion, and then the motion was adopted or failed. That's it. So, but you can see in these kind of sample minutes, you start off with where, when the meeting was, if the president and secretary were present, that you corrected and approved the minutes of the prior meeting. Then in terms of reports, that's all you need to put in about reports, that you received the report of the property manager and was placed on file after questions. Then you see the next one, there's a motion. You see how you don't put down who seconded the motion. You don't put down why that person, what they said about their motion. You just put down the motion. And then that after debate, it was adopted. If there's no debate, you can just say the motion was adopted, the motion failed. And then you can see that fourth paragraph is what happened if a motion wasn't adopted or failed, but is still disposed of in some way. So in this case, it was postponed until a later meeting. You put that down, all right? And then you put down what time the meeting adjourned, and you put down, you know, if you're the secretary, you write your name, you sign the minutes. That's it. Most meetings, you should be able to do the minutes in a page or two, unless you're just having a tremendous number of motions. Most of the time, you should be able to fit your meeting minutes in a page or two. So to all the secretaries on boards, use this as a sample, do minutes like this. It's going to make your job tremendously easier. Let's go to reports. The order of reports, unless you're a government accident wise, are your officer reports, standing committee, special committee reports. Unless there's recommendations on the report, there's nothing to do. You don't need to vote on them. You just need to say they're placed on file, put them on file. If they didn't give a written report and it's an oral report, the secretary should just includes a very brief summary of the content of the report in the minutes. That's it. Unfinished business. Unfinished business is, yeah, apparently I have my report slide twice. Unfinished business is just business where you haven't, that's been postponed to this meeting, or where the previous meeting was adjourned and you didn't make and you didn't complete an item of business. It's not something you talked about in the past. New business is where most of the things happened. That's where your most of debate is, right? Where your, unless the budget comes out of the treasurer's report, your motion to adopt the budget is going to be a new business. Your motion to, in a board meeting, hire your property manager, hire a vendor, whatever, all that's a new business. And a membership meeting, likely the only things you're actually going to have for new business, because the limited things the members can do, it's going to be election of directors, amendment to the governing documents, those sorts of things. Then finally closing the meeting, presiding officer makes a bunch of announcements. And then if all the items on the agenda are concluded, president can just declare the meeting adjourned. Or, can call for a motion to adjourn. But if you have like an adopted agenda where you got through all 5 things, the president can just say, we've completed all the items on the agenda, so the meeting is now adjourned. Don't overthink adjourning the meeting. I mean, frankly, everybody likes voting on a motion to adjourn, especially when you've been there for a while. So if you're the president, let everybody have some fun. Ask for a motion to adjourn, you'll get one. It requires a majority vote, you're going to get it. This is the easiest part of the agenda. If it's a membership meeting, you maybe have a social portion, adjourn the formal business meeting before you have the social portion. And especially if the social portion of the meeting has beer and wine or something and hors d'oeuvres, definitely adjourn your business meeting before you give everybody beer and wine. That's going to lead to a lot of potential useless, I've just seen meetings go poorly if you start the drinking before the meeting's over. So finish the business meeting. Then if you have social time, you have like a little party, then do the party. All right, so I don't have a lot of time for virtual meetings. Rich, what do we got?
We do have a few questions. We'll try to crank these out. So should financial reports, for example, be submitted separately, not part of the minutes?
So I guess it depends on if they're sensitive or not. If they're sensitive, then potentially those should be, kept in, should be considered an executive session or something. If it's just a general financial report, if it's your standard monthly financials that the members should be able to access anyway, those can be included with the minutes as usual. Probably your like delinquency summary or something where, federal debt collection laws are going to prohibit you from distributing the names of everybody that owe the association money. That sort of thing should either be considered an executive session, or you should just not have specific names or addresses with those delinquencies. What else we got?
All right, 2 quick questions on minutes, then we get back to virtual meetings. Should the minutes include a recap of each committee report?
If the committee report was oral, it should include a brief summary of the report. But if the committee report was written, it should just state that the committee gave their report and that the written report was placed on file with the association, in the records.
And along those lines, should sorry, go ahead.
No,
along those lines, should reports or adopted policies be added to minutes?
Should what kind of reports?
Reports or adopted policies.
Yeah, you can attach those to the minutes. Like if the board adopts a resolution or adopts a policy, you can attach those to the minutes. That's fine. All right, so virtual meetings. Let's talk about, here's things you need to think about when you're holding a virtual meeting, either a virtual board meeting or a membership meeting. First of all, virtual meeting etiquette, right? Not everybody's done a lot of Zooms for work, so people might not be used to muting. They might not be used to having their video on or off. if you're using Zoom or something and there's a chat feature, what's the plan for the chat? What are you thinking? What are you doing in terms of if people have technical issues? Who's administering the meeting? Are you expecting the person who's chairing the meeting, the president, to also administer the virtual part of the meeting? You shouldn't do that. That's a bad idea. And if it's a membership meeting, you probably want to adopt rules. And I'm going to go through quickly some suggested virtual meeting rules that kind of speaks to each of these questions that you should think through before you have a virtual meeting, especially a virtual membership meeting. A virtual board meeting with 5 people is a much different thing than a virtual membership meeting with 100 people. All right, so here's some suggested virtual meeting rules that some of my clients have used that are effective, and I'll explain why they've been used. First, you have a rule that says members should log in 15 minutes before the start of the meeting to confirm their technology works and to get checked in. You're going to need to be checking people to make sure people are actually owners in the association. That takes time. And then also inevitably people are going to have problems with their microphones or cameras. You don't want to delay the start of the meeting to do all that process. So start your meetings early. Meetings against members of the association only, that's kind of self-explanatory, right? And we went through this before, how if you're not a member, you don't have any rights under the governing documents. Members must identify themselves by the name and address so they may be verified. The reason why you'd have a rule like that is because, especially in Zoom or any other virtual platform, if somebody you're going to have people that are logging into the meeting from like Tim's iPad or just a phone number, right? And you have no idea who that is. So during check-in, you need to have people that are, finding out who that phone number is and then renaming that person or having them renamed so you know that that's actually Tim Smith. Or have Tim rename his iPad to Tim Smith so you know that's actually a member of the association. In terms of proxies, and I could do a whole presentation of proxies, but have a rule, if you're doing a virtual meeting, have a rule about turning in proxies in advance, or if they can't turn them in advance, logging on and making the secretary aware of the proxies, because obviously voting virtually gets complicated if you're holding a whole bunch of proxies. Other rules, it's a good rule to mute everybody upon entry into the meeting if they should remain muted without speaking. This goes into virtual meeting etiquette. Similarly, you should have a rule that people should participate from a quiet, private location. The reason why you should have a rule like that for your virtual membership meetings is because, and why people should be muted when they're not talking, is all it takes is one person unmuted outside in a windstorm and nobody can hear anything. It derails the whole meeting. So have a rule to prevent that. Similarly, the chat is not, you should have a rule about the chat. The thing about the chat is not easily controlled by the chair and it's not really debate, right? People are just putting things in the chat. So usually it's a good idea to have a rule to limit the chat to be, that's how you can be recognized, or if you're having technical difficulties, that's how you can communicate with whoever's administering the meeting, hopefully your property manager or some other member of the board who's helping administer the meeting, how you can communicate with them that you're having technical issues, and then they can call you or something and try to work you through that so you can get into the meeting. At virtual meetings, I'd strongly suggest a rule limiting speaker time to, rather than the default under Roberts, which is, 2 speeches for up to 10 minutes each, maybe limit people to 3 minutes or 2 minutes or something. Have a rule about what happens if people use profanity or threatening language. The reason why I bring this up is people are meaner online. If somebody's sitting at home just looking at their laptop, my great experience is they're going to be nastier and meaner and more aggressive than they would if they were in a room with 60 other people. So have a rule about that you can remove those people or mute those people if somebody, starts off on a, profanity-filled tirade, you can just mute them and kick them out of the meeting. Similarly, here's another rule like that, having people that should be polite to each other. Another suggested rule about the chat, only for request technical assistance or request for recognition to speak. You want to have a rule. So you want to, every time you have a large virtual meeting, somebody's going to have technical issues. Somebody's going to log in from bad internet. Somebody's going to get disconnected for some reason. Somebody's going to log in from their phone and they're going to drive through a dead spot and lose the meeting. You want to have a rule that you can't go back, that one person getting disconnected means you don't have to redo a whole part of the meeting. And then finally, you should have a rule about etiquette when people are speaking. Obviously they have to unmute, but commonly I see that people, would say you need to turn your camera on to speak, to try to simulate what you'd have in sort of a real face-to-face meeting where, somebody would stand up and everybody would be able to recognize the speaker. Now, I think I'm right at time. We're close to it. Rich, do we have any more questions that we can get to before we're over?
We're out of time. I just want to remind all the participants that our meetings are available for download at CAMS MGT under the board members section. Past presentations are there. All of Michael's talking points are there as well. We thank you all. It's been our pleasure to serve you this evening.
Thanks, everybody. Glad you came.